The first thing I noticed when I walked through my front door after 6 months in Syria wasn't the stack of unopened mail or the layer of dust on everything I'd left behind. It was the silence, not the peaceful kind you'd expect from a house that's been waiting patiently for its owner to return. This was the hollow, accusatory silence of a place that had been abandoned by more than just me. I dropped my duffel bag on the hardwood floor with a thud that echoed through the empty rooms. "Honey, I'm home," I called out sarcastically to no one, my voice bouncing off walls that felt foreign despite having painted them myself 3 years ago. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Colin Harker, and I'm what they politely call a military contractor these days. Used to be special ops, now I do the same job for 3 times the pay and half the recognition. 36 years old, built like someone who spent more time carrying heavy things up mountains than sitting behind a desk, and apparently married to a woman who couldn't be bothered to pick me up from the airport. The kitchen counter held a single post-it note in Tara's careful handwriting. "Staying with a friend tonight. Don't wait up. T." I stared at that note for a full minute, feeling something cold settle in my chest. 6 months. 6 months of eating sand, dodging mortars, and counting days until I could come home to my wife, and she couldn't even be here for my first night back. "Well, Colin," I said to the empty kitchen, "nothing says welcome home hero like cold pizza and an empty bed." I grabbed a beer from the fridge, at least she'd kept it stocked, and walked through the house, taking inventory of what had changed. New throw pillows on the couch, expensive ones, the kind Tara used to point out in magazines while complaining we couldn't afford them. Fresh flowers in a vase I'd never seen before. The bathroom smelled like perfume I didn't recognize, something floral and cloying that made my nose itch. But it was the garage that really got my attention. Tara's old Honda was gone, replaced by a gleaming white BMW sedan that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. I ran my hand along its pristine hood, noting the temporary tag still taped to the back window. "Staying with a friend?" I muttered. "Right." Back in the kitchen, I opened our laptop, the one we shared, though Tara always forgot I knew the password. Her email was still logged in, and I'm not proud of what I did next, but 6 months of wondering why her calls had gotten shorter and her texts more distant had left me with questions that needed answers. The first email I found was from BMW Financial Services, thanking her for her purchase and outlining payment terms that would have made my accountant weep. The second was from her sister Jennifer, asking how the situation with Colin was going and whether she'd made her decision yet. My hands were steady as I scrolled through more messages. Years of training had taught me to stay calm when gathering intelligence, even when that intelligence was about my own life falling apart. But when I found the folder labeled Grant, my professional composure cracked just a little. Grant Foley. I remembered him from my Army days. Cocky, handsome in that all-American way that made women stupid and men want to punch him. He'd been my teammate once, back when I still believed in things like loyalty and brotherhood. Now he ran some private security firm that charged corporations a fortune to protect executives who thought they were more important than they actually were. The photos in that folder told a story I didn't want to read. Tara and Grant at restaurants I couldn't afford. Tara wearing lingerie I'd never seen her in. Tara in positions that made it very clear she'd been staying with more than just a friend. I closed the laptop and finished my beer in one long pull. Then I opened another one and started planning. Here's the thing about being betrayed by people you trust. It clarifies things. All those months overseas, I'd been the good guy, the faithful husband, the loyal friend, the honorable soldier doing his duty while his wife held down the fort at home. Turns out the fort had been overrun while I was gone, and the enemy was wearing a familiar face. If I was going to be cast as the villain in this story, I might as well play the part properly. I grabbed my keys and drove across town to Grant's condo complex, a trendy development full of young professionals who thought exposed brick and industrial lighting made them sophisticated. Tara's new BMW was parked right out front, not even trying to hide. The sight of it sitting there so brazenly made something dark and satisfied settle in my chest. They weren't even being careful. That was going to make this easier. I parked across the street and pulled out my phone, taking pictures of the car, the license plate, the building address. Evidence. Then I walked over and slipped a note under her windshield wiper. You left your dignity in my garage. Might want to come pick it up. Your husband. Grant's motorcycle was parked in the covered area, a custom Harley he'd always been stupidly proud of. I'd heard him talk about that bike for hours back in the day, describing every modification like it was a work of art instead of an overpriced toy for men having midlife crises. I pulled out my tactical knife and quietly let the air out of both tires. Not slashing. That would be vandalism. Just pressing the valve stems until they deflated with soft, satisfying hisses. Then I used the knife's tip to scratch a small C into the leather seat, right where he'd see it every time he sat down. As I walked back to my truck, I noticed movement in one of the condo windows, a woman's silhouette holding what looked like a phone. Even in the darkness, I recognized the shape. Janelle Price, Tara's best friend from the physical therapy clinic where she worked. Jan had never liked me, always thought Tara had married beneath her station. That's going to land somewhere messy, I said to myself, but I wasn't particularly worried. If Jan wanted to play games, she'd find out I was better at them than she expected. I drove home through the quiet streets of our military town, past the bars where off-duty soldiers drank away their problems and the pawn shops where they sold their dignity for quick cash. This place had been my home for 8 years, but tonight it felt like enemy territory. Back at the house, I sat in my kitchen and made a list, not a list of grievances or hurt feelings. I wasn't some heartbroken teenager writing in a diary. This was an operational plan, the kind I'd made dozens of times when preparing to neutralize threats overseas. Tara thought she was fighting a husband who'd be devastated by her betrayal, who'd cry and beg and make it easy for her to paint herself as the victim of a failed marriage. Grant thought he was dealing with some cuckolded soldier who'd slink away quietly rather than make waves. They were both wrong. I wasn't the same man who'd left for Syria 6 months ago. That version of Colin Harker had believed in playing by the rules, in being the bigger person, in honor and loyalty, and all those other concepts that meant nothing when the people you trusted most were busy stabbing you in the back. This version of Colin Harker had learned some new rules overseas, and he was about to teach them to everyone who thought they could treat him like a fool. The next morning, I woke up alone in my own bed for the first time in 3 years of marriage, not counting deployments. The house felt different in daylight, not just empty, but actively hostile, like it was rejecting my presence. I made coffee in the machine Tara had insisted we needed, some Italian thing that cost more than my first car, and made espresso that tasted like burnt disappointment. My phone had 6 missed calls from Tara and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. The first one, sent at 11:47 p.m., was almost apologetic. We need to talk when you're ready. By 2:33 a.m., the tone had shifted. I saw what you did to Grant's bike. This is exactly why we have problems. The final message, sent just 20 minutes ago, dispensed with any pretense of civility. You're acting like a psycho. I'm staying at Jan's until you calm down. I laughed out loud at that last one. Psycho was rich, coming from a woman who'd been documenting her affair in explicit detail while her husband was getting shot at in the desert. But the mention of Jan's place was interesting. Jan lived in a cramped apartment across town, not the kind of place where someone would park a $60,000 car overnight. I called Tara back, putting on my best concerned husband voice. She answered on the first ring. Colin, thank God. I was so worried when you didn't respond to my messages. Sorry, honey. I guess I was more tired from the flight than I thought. I slept deeply. I let that phrase hang in the air for just a moment. How was your night? You said you were staying with a friend? Yes, Jan's place. You know how she gets when she's having boyfriend troubles. She needed someone to talk to. That's my Tara, always helping people in need. I'm sure Grant appreciates having such a caring friend around. The silence on the other end stretched long enough for me to count to 10. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing at all. Just that it's nice when friends support each other through difficult times. Speaking of which, someone vandalized Grant's motorcycle last night. Terrible thing. You didn't happen to notice anything suspicious, did you? Colin, we need to talk. In person. There are things... I'm sure there are, but I'm pretty busy today, getting reacquainted with civilian life. Maybe we can schedule something for later in the week. I'll have my people call your people. I hung up before she could respond and immediately blocked her number. Not permanently. I'd need to monitor her communications, but long enough to let her panic simmer for a while. The next call I made was to Mick Sullivan, who ran the MMA gym where I'd trained before my last deployment. Mick was 62 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and had been teaching people how to hurt each other professionally for 30 years. He was also one of the few people in town who'd never tried to bullshit me about anything. Colin Harker, you ugly bastard, Mick's voice boomed through the phone. Heard you were back. How was the sandbox? Hot, sandy, and full of people trying to eliminate me. So basically like high school, but with better weapons. You got time for a conversation? For you? Always. Get your ass down here. I'll put some coffee on. Mick's gym occupied the bottom floor of a converted warehouse on the wrong side of town, the kind of place where serious people came to do serious work without worrying about juice bars or yoga classes. The smell hit me as soon as I walked in. Sweat, leather, and the metallic tang that never quite came out of the mats no matter how much you cleaned them. Mick was working with a young Marine, teaching him how to escape a rear naked choke. He finished the lesson, sent the kid to work the heavy bag, and walked over to where I was standing. You look like shit, he said by way of greeting. Thanks. You always know just what to say to make a guy feel welcome. I'm serious. You've got that look. Same one you had when you came back from Afghanistan the first time. What happened? I gave him the abbreviated version. Came home to find wife cheating with old army buddy, discovered they'd been planning this for months, now trying to figure out my next move. Mick listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small grunting sounds that could have meant anything. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked over to a mini fridge in the corner and came back with 2 bottles of water. You want my advice? He asked. That's why I'm here. Don't get mad. Get mean. There's a difference. Explain. Mad is emotional. Mad makes you do stupid things that feel good in the moment, but screw you over long term. Mean is calculated. Mean is patient. Mean waits for the right moment and then strikes where it hurts most. He took a long drink of water and studied my face. Your wife and her boyfriend. They're expecting mad. They're ready for you to lose your shit, make threats, maybe get yourself arrested for assault or harassment. That way, they get to be the victims, and you get to be the crazy ex-husband who couldn't handle the truth. And mean? Mean gives them exactly what they deserve, but does it in a way that leaves you clean and them destroyed. Mean plays the long game. I spent the next 2 hours working out with Mick, letting my body remember what it felt like to move with purpose, instead of just going through the motions of staying in shape. By the time I left, I had a plan. Step 1 was information gathering. I drove to the physical therapy clinic where Tara worked, a upscale place that catered to injured athletes and wealthy hypochondriacs. The parking lot was full of expensive cars and the kind of people who wore workout clothes that cost more than most people's rent. I didn't go inside. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I parked across the street and waited. Sure enough, at 12:30, Tara emerged with Jan and 2 other women I recognized as her co-workers. They walked to a trendy bistro 3 blocks away, the kind of place that served $15 salads and called them artisanal. I followed at a distance and took a table where I could observe without being seen. The conversation looked intense, with lots of gesturing and head shaking. John appeared to be doing most of the talking, while Tara sat there looking miserable and occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. After 20 minutes, I'd seen enough. I paid for my coffee and left, but not before taking note of Jan's car in the restaurant parking lot. A red Mazda with a coexist bumper sticker and a parking permit for the clinic. Jan had always struck me as the type of person who put political slogans on her car to let everyone know how enlightened she was. That evening, I got a call from my son Michael. He was 9 years old and lived with my ex-wife Sarah in Virginia. We'd been married young, divorced amicably when we realized we were better as friends than spouses and had maintained a decent relationship for Michael's sake. "Dad, Mom says you're back from your trip. Can I come visit soon?" "Of course, buddy. I'd love to see you. How's school going?" "It's okay. Mom says you might be moving soon." She seemed worried about something. I felt my jaw tighten. Sarah and I had our issues, but she'd never been one to involve Michael in adult problems. If she was worried enough to mention it to him, it meant word of my situation had already started spreading. "Everything's fine, Michael. Adults sometimes have complicated things to work out, but it doesn't change anything between you and me. You know that, right?" "Yeah, I know. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. More than you can imagine." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and stared at the note Tara had left the night before. 24 hours ago, I'd been a husband coming home to his wife. Now I was a cautionary tale, the subject of worried phone calls and hushed conversations in bistros. But that was okay. Let them talk. Let them think they had me figured out. They had no idea what was coming. The school gymnasium smelled like industrial disinfectant and teenage desperation, a combination that brought back memories I'd tried hard to forget. I was there for the annual Military Families fundraiser, one of those community events where everyone pretended to care about supporting the troops while really just wanting to be seen doing their civic duty. Tara was there too, of course. She'd been helping organize this thing for 2 years, back when she still introduced herself as Colin Harker's wife, instead of whatever she was calling herself now. I spotted her across the room, standing near the silent auction tables with Jan and a cluster of other clinic employees, all of them shooting glances in my direction like I was some kind of unexploded ordnance. I'd been back for a week, and the gossip mill had been working overtime. Small military towns are like high schools with better weapons. Everyone knows everyone else's business, and secrets have the half-life of radioactive isotopes. By now, half the town knew Tara and I were having problems, though the exact nature of those problems seemed to vary depending on who was telling the story. "Colin, there you are!" I turned to find Doc Evans walking toward me with a beer in each hand. Doc had been my squad medic in Afghanistan, a steady, reliable guy who'd saved more lives than he could count and never bragged about any of them. Now, he was a cop with the local sheriff's department, married to a kindergarten teacher, and the kind of person who still invited me to barbecues, even when everyone else was treating me like a leper. "Doc, didn't expect to see you here. Sarah made me come. Says it's important to support community events." He handed me one of the beers. "Plus, I heard there might be some entertainment tonight." "What kind of entertainment?" "The kind where estranged husbands and their wives' boyfriends end up in the same room and everyone pretends not to notice the tension." I followed his gaze across the room to where Grant Foley was holding court near the basketball hoop, surrounded by the kind of people who thought expensive haircuts and designer jeans made them interesting. He was wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month, and he had that easy confidence that came from never having been truly tested by anything more challenging than a difficult golf course. "He's been here about 10 minutes, Doc continued. Keeps looking over at you like he's trying to decide whether to come over and start something or just pretend you don't exist. What's your professional opinion, officer? My professional opinion is that you should probably leave before this turns into the kind of situation that generates paperwork. My personal opinion is that it might be worth sticking around to see what happens. I was about to respond when Grant made the decision for both of us. He excused himself from his admirers and walked straight toward me, that cocky swagger I remembered from our army days even more pronounced now that he was wearing civilian clothes worth more than a staff sergeant's monthly salary. "Colin Harker," he said, loud enough for half the gymnasium to hear. "Heard you were back in town." "Grant Foley," I replied, matching his volume. "Heard you were keeping my wife company while I was gone. That's what friends are for, right?" The conversations around us faded like someone had flipped a switch. In the sudden quiet, I could hear the squeak of basketball shoes on the court where some teenagers were shooting around, completely oblivious to the adult drama unfolding 20 feet away. Grant's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Tara's been going through a difficult time. Sometimes people need support from friends who understand what they're dealing with." "Oh, I'm sure you understand exactly what she's dealing with. You always were good at understanding things that belong to other people." "That's not—" "Remember that poker game in Kandahar? You understood my watch right into your pocket. Of course, I understood it right back the next day, along with about $50 in interest." Grant's face was starting to turn red, and I could see him struggling to maintain his composure in front of an audience that was growing by the minute. That was different. We were kids then. Were we? Because I'm looking at you now, and I'm seeing the same guy who thought he could take whatever he wanted just because he wanted it. Only now, instead of stealing watches, you're stealing wives. "Nobody stole anything," Grant said, his voice rising. "Maybe if you'd been a better husband. Maybe if you'd been a better man, you wouldn't have had to wait until I was overseas to make your move. But I guess courage was never your strong suit." That's when Grant made his mistake. He stepped forward, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne, and poked me in the chest with his index finger. "You don't know what you're talking about, Harker. You don't know anything about what's been going on." I looked down at his finger, still pressed against my chest, then back up at his face. When I spoke, my voice was quiet enough that only he could hear me. "Take your hand off me, Grant, right now. Because if you don't, I'm going to break that finger in 3 places, and then I'm going to explain to everyone here exactly what kind of man hits on his buddy's wife the minute he deploys." For a moment, I thought he might actually do something stupid. His jaw was clenched, his breathing shallow, and I could see the calculation going on behind his eyes. Fight or flight, with about 200 people watching to see which way he'd jump. He chose option 3, bluster. "This isn't over," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You're right," I replied, matching his volume. "It's not, but when it is over, you're going to wish you'd made different choices." Grant stalked away, pushing through the crowd like an angry child. The conversations gradually resumed, but I could feel eyes on me from every direction. Some sympathetic, some disapproving, most just curious to see what would happen next. Doc appeared at my elbow. "Well, that was subtle. I thought so. You realize half these people are going to be calling you the bad guy by tomorrow morning? Let them. I've been called worse things by better people." I finished my beer and was about to leave when Tara materialized in front of me, her face flushed and her eyes bright with what looked like a combination of anger and embarrassment. "We need to talk," she said. "Now." "Do we? Because last time I checked, you were staying at Jan's place indefinitely. Doesn't sound like someone who wants to talk." "Colin, please, not here. Not like this." I looked around the gymnasium at all the faces pretending not to watch our conversation and felt something cold and satisfied settle in my chest. "No, I think here is perfect. Public, lots of witnesses, very civilized. What did you want to talk about, Tara?" "About us. About what happens next." "What happens next is pretty simple. You've made your choice, I've made mine. Now we live with the consequences. It doesn't have to be like this. We can handle this like adults. I laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. Adults? You want to talk about handling things like adults? Adults don't sneak around behind their spouse's back. Adults don't max out credit cards to buy cars they can't afford while their husband is overseas. Adults don't document their affairs in explicit detail and then act surprised when someone finds the evidence. Tara went pale. You went through my computer? It's our computer, Tara. Joint property, remember? Just like our house, our bank account, and apparently our marriage vows, though you seem to have forgotten about that last part. You had no right. I had every right. I'm your husband. Or at least I was, until you decided to upgrade to a newer model. The gymnasium had gone completely quiet now. Even the teenagers had stopped shooting baskets to listen to the show. Tara looked around desperately, as if searching for support from the crowd, but found only curious faces and uncomfortable silence. This is exactly why we have problems, she said, her voice breaking. You always have to make everything about you. You never consider how your actions affect other people. My actions? I stepped closer, and she instinctively backed away. Let me tell you about my actions, Tara. For 6 months, my actions consisted of getting up every morning in a place where people wanted to eliminate me, doing my job, and thinking about coming home to my wife. Your actions consisted of sleeping with my former teammate and spending my combat pay on a car you knew I couldn't afford. Someone in the crowd gasped. Tara's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't done. You want to know what happens next? I'll tell you exactly what happens next. You're going to take your new car and your new boyfriend and your new life, and you're going to live with the choices you made. And every time someone in this town looks at you, they're going to remember this conversation and know exactly what kind of person you really are. I turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Tara standing alone in the middle of the gymnasium floor. The crowd parted in front of me like I was Moses crossing the Red Sea, and I could hear the whispered conversation starting before I'd even reached the door. Outside, the night air felt cool against my skin. I was halfway to my truck when Doc caught up with me. Feel better? He asked. Not yet, I said, but I'm getting there. 2 weeks after the gymnasium incident, I was sitting in my truck outside the physical therapy clinic, watching Tara's world continue to unravel in slow motion. She'd moved out of Jan's apartment and into an extended-stay hotel, the kind of place where people went when they were between lives and running out of options. The BMW had been repossessed 3 days ago, leaving her dependent on rides from co-workers and the occasional Uber. Grant, meanwhile, had discovered that having an affair with a married woman wasn't great for business when your clients valued discretion and family values. 2 of his biggest contracts had been mysteriously canceled, and word around town was that his company was struggling to find new work. Amazing how quickly news traveled in a community where everyone knew everyone else's business. But it was Jan who interested me most. Jan, who'd been Tara's constant companion through all of this. Jan, who'd been whispering in her ear from the beginning, encouraging her to follow her heart and not settle for less than she deserved. Jan, who'd been at Grant's condo that first night, watching from the window with her phone in her hand. I'd been doing some research on Jan Price, and what I'd found was illuminating. 3 years ago, she'd worked for a company I'd done some consulting for, a mid-sized defense contractor that specialized in training programs for military personnel. She'd been fired for falsifying expense reports and trying to sell client information to competitors. The firing had been quiet. No charges filed, just a quick termination and a non-disclosure agreement that kept her out of jail but also out of the defense industry. What made it interesting was that I'd been the one who'd discovered her activities and reported them to management. She'd never known it was me. The investigation had been handled through corporate channels, and my involvement had been kept confidential. But Jan was smart enough to figure out who'd been in a position to uncover her schemes. She'd been planning this for 3 years, waiting for the perfect opportunity to destroy my life the way I'd destroyed hers. Tara had just been the weapon she'd chosen to use. I was still processing this revelation when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Colin? It's Sarah, Michael's mother." My ex-wife sounded worried, which wasn't like her. Sarah was one of the most level-headed people I'd ever known, the kind of woman who handled crises with calm efficiency and saved the emotional breakdowns for later. "Hey, Sarah, is everything okay? Is Michael all right?" "Michael's fine. But I got a call today that I thought you should know about. A woman named Janelle Price contacted me. She said she was a friend of your current wife and that she was concerned about Michael's safety." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What kind of concerns?" "She said you'd been displaying erratic behavior since returning from overseas. Aggressive incidents, threats, possible PTSD symptoms. She suggested that maybe Michael shouldn't visit until you'd gotten some professional help." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that if I had concerns about my son's safety, I'd discuss them with his father, not some stranger who called me out of the blue. Then I told her not to contact me again." I closed my eyes and rubbed my forehead. Jan was escalating, trying to isolate me from everyone who mattered. First my wife, then my reputation in the community, now my relationship with my son. "Sarah, I want you to know—" "Colin, stop. I know you. We were married for 4 years, and you've been Michael's father for 9. You're a lot of things, stubborn, sarcastic, sometimes too intense for your own good, but you're not dangerous. Not to people you care about. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I also want you to know that if this woman contacts me again, I'm going to file a harassment complaint with the police. And if she tries to involve Michael in whatever game she's playing, I'm going to make her life very complicated." After we hung up, I sat in my truck and thought about what Jan was trying to accomplish. She'd turned my wife against me, poisoned my reputation in the community, and now she was trying to drive a wedge between me and my son. It was a comprehensive campaign of destruction, methodical and patient. The problem for Jan was that she was fighting someone who'd been trained in the same kind of warfare. And unlike her, I didn't have anything left to lose. I drove home and spent the evening making phone calls. The first was to a private investigator I'd worked with before, a former cop named Rita Vasquez who specialized in background checks and surveillance. I gave her everything I had on Jan and asked her to dig deeper. The second call was to my lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, who handled military divorces and security clearance issues. I explained the situation and asked her to start preparing for a war. The third call was to Mick at the gym. "I need to borrow your place tomorrow night," I said. "After hours. There's something I need to take care of." "This about your wife and her friend?" "Among other things. You need help. Not the kind you're thinking of. But thanks. Colin, whatever you're planning, make sure it's something you can live with afterward. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but it can poison the cook if you're not careful." The next evening, I sent identical text messages to Tara, Grant, and Jan. Emergency meeting about divorce settlement. Mick's gym, 9 p.m., come alone. Then I sat back and waited to see who would show up. All 3 of them arrived within 10 minutes of each other, which told me they'd been in communication throughout this entire mess. They stood in the middle of the empty gym, looking confused and slightly afraid, like children who'd been called to the principal's office. I watched them from the shadows for a few minutes, letting them get nervous. They whispered among themselves, John doing most of the talking while Tara looked around anxiously and Grant tried to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. Finally, I stepped into the light. "Thanks for coming," I said. "I thought it was time we all had an honest conversation." "Colin, what is this about?" Tara asked. "You said something about a settlement?" "Oh, we're going to settle things all right. But first, I want to clear up some misconceptions." I walked over to the sound system Mick used for training music and plugged in my phone. "You see, I've been doing some research lately, learning about people's histories, their motivations, their real agendas. It's been very educational. I don't know what you think you've discovered, Jan said, but shut up, Jan. You'll get your turn to talk. I pressed play on my phone, and the gym's speakers crackled to life. The first voice that emerged was Grant's, recorded during a phone conversation I'd intercepted 2 days earlier. She's completely under control. Harker doesn't suspect anything, and even if he did, who's going to believe him? Everyone in town thinks he's having some kind of breakdown. Jan's voice followed. Good. The longer we can keep him isolated and looking unstable, the better. Tara's already talking about filing a restraining order. Then Tara, I feel terrible about all of this. Maybe we should just tell him the truth. Jan again. The truth? The truth is that he destroyed my career and ruined my life. Now it's his turn to see how it feels. Grant, you never told me this was personal. Jan, everything is personal. Colin Harker cost me everything I worked for. Now I'm going to cost him everything he cares about. I stopped the recording and looked at their faces. Tara had gone pale and was staring at Jan like she'd never seen her before. Grant looked confused and angry. Jan just looked defiant. Surprised? I asked. You shouldn't be. You taught me a valuable lesson, Jan. You showed me that the people closest to you are often the ones most capable of betraying you. You recorded us illegally, John said. That won't hold up in court. Who said anything about court? This isn't about legal proceedings. This is about truth. I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. Right now, I'm streaming live to a private Facebook group that includes about 200 people from our community. Everyone who was at the gymnasium that night, plus their friends, plus anyone else who's been following this little drama. Tara gasped. Colin, you can't. I can, and I am. See, the thing about living in a small town is that reputation matters, and right now, everyone who's watching this stream is learning exactly who you people really are. I turned to Jan. They're learning that you orchestrated this entire thing as revenge for getting fired from your last job, that you manipulated my wife and convinced her to have an affair just so you could destroy my marriage. Then to Grant, they're learning that you knew this was all a setup and went along with it anyway, because you thought it would be fun to screw over an old teammate. Finally to Tara, and they're learning that you were willing to throw away 8 years of marriage because your best friend convinced you that you deserved better than the man who loved you. The three of them stood there in stunned silence as I continued. Here's what's going to happen next. Jan, you're going to leave town. Tonight. Because after this stream ends, you won't be able to show your face anywhere in this community without people knowing exactly what kind of person you are. You can't make me. I'm not making you do anything. I'm just pointing out that staying here would be uncomfortable, especially when people start connecting you to some other interesting things I've discovered about your employment history. Jan's defiance cracked. What other things? The clinic where you work? Turns out they have some very strict policies about employees who've been terminated for fraud from previous jobs, policies they might not have known about when they hired you. I turned to Grant. As for you, I think your business problems are just getting started. Amazing how quickly word spreads in the defense contractor community when someone's been caught up in a scandal involving adultery and deception. Clients don't like that kind of publicity. Grant stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. You son of a bitch. You think you can destroy people's lives just because your wife doesn't want you anymore? I'm not destroying anything. I'm just revealing what was already there. The destruction is all yours. That's when Grant made his second mistake of the evening. He swung at me, a wild, angry punch that telegraphed itself from about 3 counties away. I sidestepped easily and caught his arm, using his own momentum to send him stumbling into the heavy bag. Grant, don't make this worse than it already is. You're on camera, remember? He came at me again, and this time, I didn't just dodge. I grabbed him, spun him around, and put him on the ground with a move I'd learned in hand-to-hand combat training. He stayed down, breathing hard and looking up at me with hatred in his eyes. "Tara," I said, not taking my eyes off Grant, "you have a choice to make. You can keep following Jan's advice and see where that leads you, or you can start thinking for yourself for the first time in 3 years. Colin, I never meant for any of this to happen. Yes, you did. Maybe not the way it happened, but you meant for it to happen. You made choices, Tara. Own them." I walked over to the sound system and disconnected my phone, ending the stream. "That's all, folks. Show's over." As the three of them filed out of the gym, defeated and humiliated, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Satisfaction. Not happiness. That would come later, if at all. But the deep, cold satisfaction of a job well done. John was the last to leave. She paused at the door and looked back at me. "This isn't over," she said. "Yes," I replied. "It is." The annual Memorial Day block party was Fort Bragg's biggest community event, a sprawling celebration that turned Main Street into a carnival of barbecue smoke, craft beer, and forced patriotism. Local businesses set up booths, the high school band played songs nobody wanted to hear, and everyone pretended to care about honoring the troops, while really just wanting an excuse to day drink and gossip about their neighbors. It was perfect for what I had in mind. I'd spent the 3 weeks since the gym confrontation preparing for this moment. Jan had indeed left town, but not before filing a police report claiming I'd threatened her. The charges were dropped when Doc Evans provided security footage showing that she'd been the one making threats, but the incident had added another layer to my growing reputation as an unhinged veteran. Grant's business had collapsed completely after several of his former clients received anonymous packages containing documentation of his involvement in the affair. He'd been forced to sell his condo and move back in with his parents, a humiliation that seemed to age him 10 years in 3 weeks. Tara was living in a studio apartment across town, working at a different clinic after being quietly let go from her old job. She'd tried calling me several times, but I'd let every call go to voicemail. Her messages had evolved from angry to pleading to resigned, a progression that tracked perfectly with her declining circumstances. But I wasn't done yet. Not quite. The block party was in full swing when I arrived, carrying a laptop bag and wearing the kind of confident smile that made people nervous. I'd volunteered to help with the technical setup for the event's main stage, offering my services to the overwhelmed committee that was trying to coordinate music, speeches, and a slideshow honoring local veterans. "Colin, thank God you're here," said Betty Morrison, the event coordinator. "We're having trouble with the sound system, and nobody knows how to work the projection equipment." "Don't worry, Betty. I've got everything under control." It took me 20 minutes to get the audio and video systems working properly, connecting my laptop to the main projector and testing the wireless microphone that would be used for the afternoon speeches. The setup was perfect. A massive screen visible from anywhere on the blocked-off street, speakers powerful enough to be heard 3 blocks away, and complete control over what got displayed. The crowd had swelled to nearly 1,000 people by the time the formal program began. Local politicians gave boring speeches about sacrifice and service. The high school choir butchered the national anthem, and everyone applauded politely while checking their phones and finishing their beer. I waited until the very end when the event coordinator was about to announce the closing ceremony. Then I walked up to the stage, took the microphone, and smiled at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a few minutes, my name is Colin Harker, and I have something I'd like to share with all of you." A murmur went through the crowd. Some people recognized me from the gymnasium incident, others from the various rumors that had been circulating for weeks. I could see Tara near the back, standing with some co-workers and looking like she wanted to disappear into the pavement. 3 months ago, I came home from a deployment in Syria, looking forward to reuniting with my wife and getting back to normal life. What I found instead was a lesson in human nature that I think might interest all of you. I clicked a button on my laptop, and the big screen behind me lit up with a photo of Tara and Grant kissing outside his condo. The crowd went completely silent. "This is my wife, Tara Harker, and my former Army teammate, Grant Foley. This photo was taken while I was overseas, serving my country and thinking about coming home to the woman I loved. Another click. Another photo. This one showed Grant's motorcycle with the scratched seat and deflated tires. Now, some of you might be thinking that this is just another sad story about a cheating wife and a betrayed husband. And you'd be partially right. But the really interesting part is what happened next. I advanced to the next slide, which showed a timeline I'd created documenting Jan's involvement in orchestrating the affair. Phone records, email timestamps, financial transactions, everything laid out in chronological order. You see, this wasn't just about two people falling in love. This was about revenge. Janelle Price, who many of you know as Tara's best friend, had been planning this for 3 years. She manipulated my wife, seduced my former teammate into going along with her scheme, and orchestrated the entire affair as payback for a professional dispute we'd had years earlier. The crowd was riveted now. All conversation stopped as people stared at the screen and absorbed what I was telling them. I could see phones being pulled out, people recording my presentation for later sharing. But here's the thing about revenge. It's a game that anyone can play. The next slide showed bank records documenting how Tara had maxed out our credit cards to buy the BMW. The slide after that showed Grant's business contracts being canceled. Then came screenshots of the social media posts that had spread throughout the community after the gym incident. Over the past 3 months, I've watched my marriage disintegrate, my reputation get dragged through the mud, and my personal life become the subject of gossip and speculation. And I realized something important. If people are going to talk about you anyway, you might as well give them something worth talking about. I paused and looked out at the crowd, making eye contact with as many people as possible. So here's the truth, all of it, laid out for everyone to see. My wife cheated on me with my former teammate as part of a revenge plot orchestrated by a woman who'd been fired for fraud and theft. When I discovered this, I decided to fight back using the same weapons they'd used against me: public humiliation, professional destruction, and social isolation. The final slide was a split screen showing recent photos of all 3 conspirators: Jan loading boxes into a U-Haul truck, Grant working at a fast food restaurant, and Tara sitting alone in her studio apartment. The results speak for themselves. Jan Price has left town in disgrace. Grant Foley has lost his business and his reputation. And my wife has discovered that actions have consequences. I set down the microphone and walked to the edge of the stage, looking out at the sea of faces staring back at me. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking that I'm the villain in this story, that I went too far, that I should have been the bigger person and handled this privately. And you might be right. I picked up the microphone again. But here's what I learned during my time overseas. Sometimes being the bigger person just means being a bigger target. Sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything, including other people's good opinion of you. I could see Tara pushing through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She reached the front of the stage and looked up at me with an expression of pure desperation. "Colin, please, stop this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked down at her for a long moment, feeling nothing but a cold, empty satisfaction. "I know you are, Tara, but sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't give me back the last 8 months of my life. Sorry doesn't undo the choices you made." I turned back to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your attention today. I hope you found this educational, and I hope that the next time someone tries to tell you that Colin Harker is the bad guy in this story, you'll remember what you heard here today." I disconnected my laptop from the projection system and walked off the stage, leaving behind a crowd of stunned faces and frantic whispered conversations. As I reached my truck, I could hear the buzz of 1,000 simultaneous phone calls and text messages as people shared what they'd just witnessed. Doc Evans was waiting by my truck, shaking his head with what might have been admiration or disapproval. "Feel better now?" he asked. "You know what? I actually do. What happens next? I looked back at the crowd, at the chaos I'd created, at the wreckage of multiple lives scattered across Main Street like debris from an explosion. Now I disappear for a while. Let the dust settle. Maybe take that job offer in Colorado I've been thinking about. And Tara? Tara gets to live with the consequences of her choices, just like the rest of us. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see Tara still standing by the stage, surrounded by people who were probably asking her questions she didn't want to answer. She looked small and broken and completely alone. 3 months ago, that sight would have filled me with sympathy and regret. Now it just looked like justice. I put the truck in gear and drove away from the block party, away from the town that had been my home for 8 years, away from the wreckage of my old life. In my rearview mirror, I could see the crowd still gathered around the stage, still processing what they'd witnessed. They'd called me the villain in this story, and maybe they were right. But if I was going to be the villain, I was going to be the kind of villain who won. And as I drove toward the highway that would take me away from all of this, I couldn't help but smile. After all, villains always get the last word.